You just paid $13 for a beer, 16 ounces, a plastic cup, maybe half an inch of foam you didn't ask for. Here's what nobody at that stadium wants you to know. The beer in your hand cost less than $1 to make. Not the ticket, not the parking, not the jersey you bought at the gift shop on the way in. Just the beer, 89 cents. You paid $13 for 89 cents a beer, a markup over 1,300%. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly where the other $12.11 went. Some of it makes sense. Some of it is one of the most legal, most brazen markups in American retail. And once you see how it actually works, you'll notice the exact same trick being played on you at the airport, the movie theater, and the cruise ship buffet. I'm Mr. Price Tag. Let's find out what you're actually paying for. Let's start with the receipt that never gets handed to you, the one the stadium sees, not the one you see. A standard domestic keg, the kind pouring Bud Light, Coors, Miller at roughly 90% of American stadiums, costs the venue somewhere between $100 and $110, wholesale. That's a 15.5-gallon keg, the industry standard half barrel. 15.5 gallons sounds like a lot, until you do the poor math. That keg holds right around 124 16-ounce pours before you even account for foam, spillage, or the extra half-inch of head every stadium vendor seems trained to leave, whether by policy or just habit, built from pouring thousands of cups a night. $110 divided by 124 pours, 89 cents. That's the actual, real, wholesale cost of the beer sitting in your hand right now. You paid $13. That's not a markup. That's a 1,360% markup. For context, the outrageous markup everybody already complains about, movie theater popcorn, sits around 1,000%. Stadium beer beats it. Airport bottled water, another famous villain of captive pricing, usually runs somewhere between 300 and 800%. Stadium beer beats that too. So where does the rest of the $13 actually go? Because, and this is the part most people get wrong, it's not all profit. Some of it is, but not all of it. Let's open the books, one layer at a time. Before a single keg gets tapped, a huge chunk of that beer's price was decided years earlier in a conference room that had nothing to do with beer at all. Most major stadiums don't choose their beer vendor the way a bar does. They sign what's called a pouring rights contract, an exclusivity deal, usually with one of the 2 or 3 biggest beverage companies in the country, worth tens of millions of dollars over the life of the deal. The beverage company pays the stadium a massive upfront fee, sometimes structured as a straight payment, sometimes as guaranteed minimum purchases, for the exclusive right to be the only beer sold inside. In exchange, that supplier locks out every competitor. No craft brewery sneaking in a better price. No local beer distributor undercutting them. One supplier, one price floor, for years at a time. That deal has to get paid back, and it gets paid back one $13 cup at a time. This is also why you'll notice something if you've ever paid attention. It's incredibly hard to find a cheap beer option at most major stadiums, even when a cheaper brand exists on the shelf everywhere else in America. The contract doesn't allow it. Competition, the thing that normally keeps prices in check, has been contractually removed from the building. And this isn't unique to beer. The exact same structure exists for soft drinks, which is why you only ever see one soda brand's logo in a stadium, never a competitor's, no matter how big that competitor is anywhere else in the country. Here's something most fans assume that's actually wrong. They think the team is selling them the beer. At most stadiums, they're not. The team leases out the entire concessions operation to a third-party company, massive food service operators that run concessions at dozens of stadiums, arenas, and airports across the country. You've probably never heard their names, but you've definitely bought a hot dog from one. That concessions company pays the stadium, meaning the team or the venue ownership, a cut of every single sale. Sometimes it's structured as rent. Sometimes it's a straight revenue share, meaning for every dollar you spend on that beer, a set percentage gets wired straight to the team before the concessions company keeps a dime for itself. So now you've got 3 parties with their hand out before your beer even reaches the tap. The beverage supplier who locked in the exclusivity deal, the concessions operator running the stand, and the team or stadium ownership taking a cut of the concessions operator's revenue. Each of those parties negotiated their piece assuming beer would be priced high enough to make all 3 cuts worthwhile. That assumption is baked into the $13 before you ever walk up to the counter. Now, to be fair to the people actually pouring your beer, some of that markup is legitimate operating cost, and it's worth being honest about that instead of pretending it's all pure greed. Every vendor working that stand needs to be paid, often at a premium, since stadium concession shifts are short, chaotic, and require serving hundreds of people in a 15-minute window between innings or at halftime. Many of these workers are part-time or seasonal, which means the venue also eats the cost of training an entirely new staff multiple times a year. Every stadium concession operation carries liquor liability insurance, a real, meaningful cost, because serving alcohol to 60,000 people at once carries legal risk most restaurants never have to think about. If a vendor overserves a fan who later causes harm, that liability can trace back to the stadium and the concessions operator both, and insurers price that risk into everything sold. There's spoilage and waste built in too. Kegs that don't get finished before they go flat, cups that get shorted, product that never makes it to a customer's hand because a game gets rained out or ends early. Stadiums also often pay premium rent purely for the concession stand's physical square footage, which is some of the most expensive retail real estate in the country per square foot, used only a handful of days a year, sitting empty and unproductive the rest of the time. None of this gets you anywhere near $13 on its own. But it's real, and it's part of the honest answer. Strip out the wholesale cost, strip out labor and insurance and rent, and there's still a significant chunk of that $13 left over as pure profit, split between the concessions operator and the team. And here's the part that should actually make you a little annoyed. Stadiums know this markup works specifically because you have no alternative. You can't leave mid-game and come back with a six-pack from the gas station down the street. You can't price compare. You're a captive customer in a building you already paid to get into, and the beer price reflects exactly that. Economists actually have a term for this: captive market pricing. It's the same reason movie theater popcorn, airport bottled water, and stadium beer all carry some of the highest markups in retail. It's not really about the cost of the product, it's about the fact that you, standing in that line, have nowhere else to go. Once you see captive market pricing at the stadium, you start noticing it everywhere, because it's the exact same playbook run by completely different industries. Airports are maybe the closest cousin. Once you're through security, you are, by design, a captive customer for anywhere from 90 minutes to several hours. That's why a bottle of water that costs $1 at a corner store costs $4 or $5 past the checkpoint, not because bottling water got more expensive somewhere between the sidewalk and the gate, but because you no longer have a choice. Movie theaters run the same math on popcorn. The ticket alone barely turns a profit for most theater chains. Sometimes it barely covers costs at all. The actual profit engine is concessions, priced high specifically because once you're seated with 2 hours to kill, you're not walking to a grocery store for cheaper snacks. Cruise ships take it even further. Once you're in international waters, there's no competitor next door at all. Just the ship's own bars, gift shops, and specialty restaurants, often priced knowing you have literally nowhere else on Earth to spend that money for days at a time. Even concert venues run the identical model to sports stadiums. Same pouring rights contracts, same third-party concessions operators, same captive crowd math, just with a band on stage instead of a scoreboard. The pattern is always the same. Find a place where people are trapped for a few hours, remove their ability to comparison shop, and price accordingly. Stadium beer isn't an outlier. It's just one of the most visible, most talked about examples of a pricing strategy that's quietly running in dozens of places you visit every year. Here's the twist that actually proves the whole system is a choice, not a necessity. Some teams have deliberately broken from this model, pricing certain beers under $8 as a fan-friendly gesture, sometimes explicitly marketed as a value option. It's usually a smaller pour or a specific value beer tier next to the premium $13 options, but it exists, and it's usually well publicized by the team as a point of fan-friendly pride. Teams that lean into lower concession pricing tend to frame it as a loyalty play. The idea being that fans who feel less nickel and dimed come back more often, buy more merchandise, and renew season tickets at higher rates. It's a bet that slightly lower margins on beer pay for themselves in long-term attendance and goodwill. If a stadium can profitably sell a beer for $8, that tells you everything about what the $13 version is really charging you for. It's not that beer can't be sold cheaper inside a stadium. It's that most stadiums have decided not to, because the demand is inelastic enough that raising the price barely dents how many people buy it. You're not paying $13 because that's what beer costs to serve. You're paying $13 because the people selling it did the math and found out you'd pay it anyway. There's another piece worth understanding. Stadium beer prices haven't just been high. They've been climbing steadily for years, usually outpacing general inflation. Part of that is simple cost pass-through. Wholesale beer, labor, and insurance really have gotten more expensive industry-wide. But part of it is something else entirely. Stadiums have gotten very good at reading exactly how much a captive crowd will tolerate before attendance actually starts to drop, and pricing right up to that edge. New stadiums make this even more aggressive. When a city builds a new arena or stadium, it's often financed through a mix of public money and long-term debt tied to projected revenue, including concessions revenue. That means beer pricing isn't just a business decision anymore. In some cases, it's baked into how a stadium pays off the loan that built it. The $13 in your hand might, in a very real sense, be helping retire construction debt from a building that opened years before you ever walked into it. So let's put the full receipt back together, one more time, plainly. 89 cents, the actual wholesale beer. A cut for the exclusivity contract with the beverage supplier. A cut for the concessions operator running the stand. A cut for the team or stadium ownership off the top of that concessions revenue. A real smaller slice for labor, insurance, spoilage, and premium stadium real estate. Sometimes a sliver going toward paying down the very construction debt of the building you're standing in. And what's left over? Pure profit, collected specifically because you had no other option. $13, 89 cents of it was beer. The rest was the price of being a captive customer in a building with a monopoly on your thirst. That's the real cost of a $13 stadium beer. Next time you're standing in that concession line, you'll know exactly what you're actually paying for. And you'll probably start noticing the same trick at the airport gate, the movie theater counter, and the cruise ship bar, too. If this kind of breakdown is useful to you, seeing what's actually behind the price tag on things you buy without thinking twice, that's exactly what this channel is going to keep doing. Every price has a story. Most of the time, it's not the story you'd guess. I'm Mr. Price Tag. I'll see you in the next one.